Hello, welcome to week two, and thanks for everyone getting started. Seemed to go pretty smoothly. You guys have all been able to work with Mural in a way that seems like that that feels as though that's pretty comfortable or getting more comfortable. So let's talk about week two and a little bit about week one. So just so you know, it isn't too crucial for you to be able to interact with Mural right away. I want to reinforce that we do have these modules that are fairly carefully written to help introduce most of the subject matter. And in many ways, week one, I'd like to start with just discussing a couple of these videos, so you'll see an area for that. Week two, we get into probably one of the more technical aspects of the course, which is extracting some data that we want to use later on and learn how to best display it and manipulate it. So this data is going to become more important. And I will say, I don't want you to particularly overthink the veracity of the data. And I'll show you in a minute. Actually, the word isn't veracity. It's more of the importance of the data. You might find better sources later or learn some techniques that get you more of what it is to work with. The important thing is to start to see that most websites and many other ways of displaying information starts with databases. And there's a kind of a funny video. I will say that the beginning of it is just a joke, but at the end it talks about how understanding how data from different sources can be put together to make something wholly new and different. And then there's a couple of techniques. There's a thing here talking a bit about data types, and data types aren't anything to get too worried about. They are things like date and time, text, long text, maybe in a sense there's some controlled language. So they're not terribly complicated, but it is good to sort of see what they look like underneath, because that's what you'll be extracting. And just like understanding a bit of the science behind it, you can't make something into something that it isn't. So it's good to understand what it is you're working with as an information architect. You can consider this to be sort of like working with, if you're designing a house, it's the drywall, it's the nails, it's the studs. You need to understand a bit about how that works, even to design a house. Certainly to design a house, you should understand a little bit about how it's built. And that's the subject of this week. And the deliverable for the end of week is finding some data that you find interesting. There's a couple of techniques. Import.io is one. Import.io does seem to indicate that you need to sign up or ask some permission. If you just go to their sign up page, put in your name, you should be able to be good to go. If anyone has issues with that, we'll just find a place to post issues on Mural, and certainly someone can help out. It's been a while since I signed up, but I've never had any difficulty with just using it. And then there's also a thing called JotForm, very similar. What it does is just allow you to create a form and understand those data types using a fairly simple, easy-to-use interface. So the point is, find a data set and then create a form that would, in a sense, enter data into that data set. That gives you the full understanding of these nuts and bolts of what we use to get data that we later manipulate. And manipulation is the beginning of this. So if we go over to our Mural, I think everyone's also doing a great job with timing. I'm recording this on Sunday, and that's the day I want to make sure everything is prepared for you. If you go quickly or move ahead, I will suggest that you do not, because you might be seeing things that you aren't meant to see. So I'd stick with the week as is until Monday, until I've gotten everything together. And even then, as I mentioned, I could make mistakes. So just you can email me or tell me. In fact, I've got pretty much a lot of emails from Mural, which is fantastic. I keep up and read everything that's happening in Mural. If you're having any issues, there was a bit of a glitch where a lot of emails came through. I think there was a mistake or two. Apologies for that. You can change your settings as to what you're notified in Mural by going to probably one of these areas. If you search for it, I think it's fairly easy to find. It's a settings area, and it says notifications, what you get notified for. I particularly like to see everything. Everyone in the class may not, but I do find it's a pretty nice email. It tells you what someone was speaking about and what the different subjects were. So if you guys like this email, I do. Just to be aware, it can get a little bit noisy, but that could be better than no information or no feedback at all. So going to last week, one of the meta things, I realized we've got quite a few people in this class. I think we're almost at 20 people. So you can see that information architecture is going to lend a hand at some point, because what you're seeing here for the most part in these open areas is unstructured data. And I'm trying to get you to learn the different ways that Mural lets you manipulate or classify your data to make it more manageable and more even. As we move forward in the class, I hope that you use these boards as a way to understand how to organize somewhat disorganized information and how to create patterns as well. So not expecting that right off the bat, and you can find that this is probably a bit of a cacophony of information until you get into the threaded discussions, which even then there may be a discussion on one point or another, and if something gets moved, it might lose its context. This is all good stuff, because as an information architect, you definitely have to make sense of a mess. Most things are poorly organized and poorly thought through, and that's basically the job, is to try to figure out ways to make it more manageable for an outside viewer. Some of these are a little bit more regular, like for this example, this is a format that we use that keeps things in a row. When it comes to grading each week, we're going to see how that works. I grade on participation, so I would suppose that in this particular case, if there was a question like this and there was 1 card per answer, that there'd be 20 cards. So in this case, I might go in to try to figure out who did not participate. So if we go to this week, let me talk about the different sections. First of all, one of the first is to talk a little bit about those videos from last week. Secondly, it's starting to query data. Query data is on the very top. You're going to be the person trying to find things and understanding data types and being able to filter through different sets of information. I think is pretty easy and fun to do on Twitter. So if you're not familiar with Twitter, you might need to familiarize yourself with the different data points. Most of you have heard of hashtags, for example. And hashtags is sort of a forced taxonomy. We'll get into taxonomies more in week 5, but it's just a different way to categorize or add some ability to find something. So hashtags definitely were popularized by Twitter, but that sort of mechanism has been around for a while. Who's doing it, when they're doing it, where they're doing it. These are things I want you to think about and find a query that gives you a set of data that you think is interesting and repeatable. And I think I already mentioned it, I'll say it once again, we want to try to be as neat and regular as possible. So if you find yourself being too much of an outlier in terms of posting, since we do need room for 20 some odd people to post, think about being a little more big picture about how we're posting. I do have an example of my own that I'm not going to go too much into, but it has to do with finding ingredients for making perfume, which is kind of a hobby of mine, and trying to understand, going from a place like like Perfume User Printed sells chemicals, and chemicals have certain scents. And this is where I started with my data set, because their website is terrible, and I wanted to try to match that data to another piece of data which is more of scents that I like or perfumes that I like, trying to understand what ingredients would make that up. So there's a bit of an arc here if you're wondering where I'm trying to go with understanding data. The next spots here are just how using data, here's a few examples of sites that are just really kind of databases that you can search. And in this case, talking a little bit about data itself, manipulation tools, and then finally that data types and building blocks of databases. So this is asking you, if you can, to contribute what you think a data type is. I think one place to look, if you're curious, as a good example, is looking at your computer. How are files on your computer? What kind of data surrounds them? And if you look at that, there's a lot of data types we use to be able to sort through and gather and organize that information. So this week is about data, and look forward to your questions and contributions. And please do post any questions that you may have. Thanks.